Peace be upon you, dear friends. What can a lonely shepherd do when an entire village is helpless? The answer is simple. The weight of the stone is not in the stone itself, but in the heart without intention. While everyone else takes refuge in excuses, the story of Ali, who says Bismillah in the name of God and walks towards the impossible, will be like medicine for everyone who has lost hope. If you are ready, we are about to begin that magnificent cautionary tale that you will watch with tears in your eyes. That night in Harmanchuk village, perched like an eagle's nest at the foot of the rugged mountains of Anatolia, the sky and earth were in turmoil. It was a storm of the kind the elders call a sign of the apocalypse. The wind whistled against the chimneys of the mud-brick houses. Lightning tore through the dark sky and struck the village like silver whips. The ancient single-lane dirt road that ran through the middle of the village, connecting them to civilization, the market, the doctor, food, and bread, stretched helplessly under the rain. When the time for the morning call to prayer arrived, the storm had subsided, but the silence it left behind was more terrifying than its noise. As the village imam, Hafiz Effendi, opened the creaking wooden door of the mosque as usual and turned towards the minaret, he couldn't believe his eyes. In the twilight, a gigantic dark shape stood in the narrow passage at the edge of the village. At first he thought it was a cloud shadow. He rubbed his eyes. He looked again. No, it wasn't a shadow. It was a huge, imposing, pitch-black rock, the size of a house that had broken off from the spring of the mountain, and it sat like a massive seal on the only road, the lifeline of the village. Hafiz Effendi's call to prayer, recited with a trembling voice, echoed more sadly than usual in the valley that morning. His voice choked as he said, "Come to salvation!" because the village's gateway to salvation had been blocked by that giant rock. The congregation, emerging from prayer, rushed to the village exit with the first rays of dawn to see the extent of the disaster. The sight was terrifying. The rock was so large that it was impossible to pass around it. One side was a precipice, the other a sheer cliff. Music. The road was blocked as if cut with a knife. The first reaction was a deep silence. People felt to their core how helpless they were in the face of this brutal force of nature. Then the silence gradually gave way to murmurs. Qasim, the wealthiest and most materialistic merchant in the village, leaped forward, pushing through the crowd. His expensive fur coat dragged on the muddy road, but he didn't care. He slammed his fist against a rock. The pain in his hand made him even angrier. "What a disgrace," he shouted. His voice echoed through the valley. "I need to go to town today. I have a lot of goods, promissory notes. Who will clear this up? Where is the government? Where is the village headman?" The headman, twirling his hat in his hand, stepped forward like a guilty child. "My lord," he said, "this is a natural disaster. What can you say to what comes from God? If I try to send word to the district now, the road is closed. I can't go. If I try to send a telegram, the wires are broken. We will wait. Surely a solution will be found." Other voices began to rise from the crowd. "My cow is about to give birth. We need a vet," said one. "We're almost out of flour. How are we going to get to the mill?" complained another. Rizah, the village coffeehouse owner, nervously tapped his prayer beads and said, "It's always that village up there's doing this." He was frantically searching for someone to blame, even though he had nothing to do with it. "This stone must have rolled down from their field. We need to go and demand an explanation." Everyone had a different opinion. Some were resentful of their fate, some were cursing the authorities, and some were circling the rock, analyzing the situation and saying, "Oh dear, what a huge stone." But no one, absolutely no one, picked up a stone and threw it aside, or came up with an idea to move the rock. Everyone was talking about the magnitude of the problem, but no one was willing to be part of the solution. It was as if the rock had fallen there from the sky, and they were waiting for a hand to descend from the sky again to remove it. When the sun climbed the hills and cast the shadow of the rock on the villagers, one person stood silently in the crowd. He wasn't shouting, complaining, or running around like the others. He wore a patched jacket and old rubber shoes. This was Ali, the lonely strange shepherd whom the villagers called a vagabond. Ali was leaning against the trunk of a tree at the very back of the crowd, watching what was happening. His eyes weren't on the rock, but on the faces of the people. He saw that the enormous stone was blocking the way. But he felt that the real obstacle wasn't in the stone, but in the hearts of the people. The merchant watched the arrogance of Qasim, the helplessness of the village headman, and the laziness of the villagers. Then he turned his gaze back to the rock. A voice inside him said, quote, 12. The sun was rising, time was running out. The village was facing the greatest test in its history. But no one seemed willing to write a single letter on the test paper yet. When the sun rose to the height of a spear, the enormous rock at the entrance to Harmanchuk village stood there, heavy and indifferent, as if it had been there for centuries. The initial shock and fear of the morning were slowly giving way to what humankind knows best, empty talk. As the sun beat down on their heads, the villagers sweated. The villagers, tired of standing on the rock, had retreated to the coffee house under the famous centuries-old plane tree in the village square, saying, quote, 13. The problem was there. It stood in the middle of the road, but the solution would be sought in the cool shade of the coffee house, in the steam of strong tea served in slender glasses. The coffee house buzzed like a beehive. Tables were joined together, chairs pulled out, as if a war tribunal had been formed. But in this tribunal it was tongues, not swords, that had been drawn. The merchant Qasim had settled in the best corner of the coffee house. As he rolled the tobacco he took from his silver tobacco pouch, the anger on his face blazed like a fiery red. Quote, 14, he roared. He slammed his fist on the table, the teaspoons clinking. Quote, 15. Quote, 16. Eyes turned to the headman. Headman Halil was shrinking smaller and smaller in his seat. Wiping the sweat from his forehead, he said, his voice trembling, quote, 17. Coffee shop owner Ruza interrupted with a tray in his hand. Quote, 18. Barber Niazi, who was sitting in the corner and known as the village's know-it-all, angrily folded the newspaper in his hand. You wouldn't understand, he said arrogantly. To move this stone from there, you need dynamite. You need an engineer. You need physics calculations. It's not something you can do by just pushing and lifting. That stone weighs at least a few tons. Do you know what that means? The villagers shook their heads in horror at the magnitude of the figure Niazi had given. Oh dear, cries Rose again. Human strength is not enough for this. God forbid we'll be crushed under it. Yet no one had even tried to push the stone. No one had picked up a pickaxe and said, let's try to break it off at one end. They were just talking. As they talked, the stone grew larger in their eyes, and as it grew larger, it became more impossible. In the furthest corner of the coffee house, on a small stool by the window, sat Ali the shepherd. He didn't have tea in front of him, music. He drank it when he had money, and when he didn't, he just inhaled its scent. No one asked him for his opinion, and he didn't say anything to anyone. Ali just listened. He listened not to the desperation of the people, but to their unwillingness. He heard the merchant Qasim's voice again. If necessary, let's hire laborers from the lower village. We'll collect the money among ourselves later. But I won't lift a finger. My back already hurts. Another chimed in. I have work to do in the field. I have no time today, the other added. My child has a fever. My wife is waiting at home. Everyone had a very important excuse. Everyone agreed on the necessity of lifting the stone. But everyone also agreed that the person who should lift the stone was someone other than themselves. There was a funeral, but no one wanted to get under the coffin. Ali slowly rose from where he was sitting. He slipped through the shadows and headed towards the door. As he was leaving, the merchant Qasim noticed him. With a mocking smile, he called out, Where are you going, strange Ali? Are you going to lift the stone by blowing on it? You know your breath is so strong, you talk to sheep. A burst of laughter erupted in the coffee house. Ali stopped. He turned his head and looked at Qasim. There was neither anger nor resentment in his eyes, only a deep, boundless pity. The weight of the stone is not from the stone, Qasim said in a whisper. The weight of the stone is the weight in the hearts of those who have no intention of lifting it. His tone was so calm that the laughter stopped abruptly. No one fully understood what he said, but the weight of his words hung in the air for a moment. Qasim is crazy. He grumbled. It's not clear what he's saying, but avoided Ali's gaze. Ali left without waiting for a reply. The sun was about to set. The village square was becoming increasingly gloomy as the shadows lengthened. In the distance, that dark shape at the edge of the village was still visible. The road was closed. Hope was closed. Hundreds of words were spent in Harmanchuk village that day. Dozens of plans were made. Thousands of excuses were made. Tea was drunk. Tobacco was rolled. The state was criticized. Fate was blamed. But when the sun set, that stone still stood there, unmoved, like a giant black in the darkness of the night, waiting for them. As the assembly of complaints dispersed, everyone returned home empty-handed, their hearts heavy. Except for one person, Ali was walking not in the opposite direction of the village, towards the mountain road, but towards the small coal shed in his house. His steps were determined. He had no intention of complaining. His intention was different. Tonight, while Harmanchuk village slept, fate would be awake. As night fell over Harmanchuk village like a heavy black blanket, the faint lights in the windows of the houses began to go out one by one. The crowd that had spent the day in the coffee house saving the world, moving rocks with their tongues, had now retreated to their warm beds, drifting into a deep sleep accompanied by snores. At the far end of the village lay the cemetery. Next to it was a single-room hut with crumbling mud bricks and a moss-covered roof. This was the world of Shepherd Ali, whom the village called a vagabond, the kind of man children avoided when they saw him, and the kind the adults simply dismissed with a _32_. That night the light in Ali's hut remained on. In the room illuminated by a flickering gas lamp, Ali knelt, gazing at an old worn Quran in front of him, but his eyes weren't on the letters but on the meaning beyond them. The villagers called him a vagabond because Ali didn't even look at the things they chased after. While Qasim was fighting his neighbor over land, Ali would change his path so as not to disturb an ant's nest on the mountain. While young people dreamed of the colorful lives of the city, Ali would watch for hours the trembling of a plane tree's leaf in the wind, shedding tears at how beautifully it recited prayers. To them, Ali was lazy, a dreamer, even a little foolish, because in their view, intelligence meant filling one's pockets. Ali's pockets were always empty, but they didn't know that his heart was so full it could buy all the granaries in the village. Ali whispered to himself the hadith, quote 33. His voice echoed off the walls of the empty room. Quote 34, he said, then, raising his hands not to the sky, but to his heart. Quote 35. He stood up. On the wall hung a rusty pickaxe and a shovel with a cracked handle, inherited from his father. These tools, sleeping there for years under cobwebs, seemed to have been waiting for this night. Ali picked up the pickaxe. The iron was cold, but Ali's palms burned like fire. Come on, old workhorse, he said to the pickaxe, as if speaking to a living being. You've been lying dormant for years, rusting away. Now it's time to wipe away the rust. Tonight we'll go to war. Our enemy is neither man nor animal. Our enemy is despair. His preparations were quick. He tied a rope around his waist. He put a piece of dry bread and a few olives in his pocket. He filled his canteen with water. He didn't look in the mirror because he had no business with his reflection. His business was with his character, his essence. When he opened the door and stepped outside, the night frost struck his face like a slap. The village was in deep silence. Only the barking of a dog in the distance could be heard. Ali walked, gliding through the shadows. He passed in front of the 3-story mansion of the merchant Qasim. The windows of the mansion were dark. While that rich man dreamed in his soft bed, Ali, penniless, was going to clear the way to save that man's property. This contrast brought a bitter smile to Ali's face. How strange, he thought. The owner of property sleeps, the owner of possession sleeps, but the one burdened with worries cannot sleep. As he reached the edge of the village, the moon emerged from behind the clouds, illuminating the enormous rock. What had seemed so vast during the day transformed into a terrifying monster in the darkness of night. It blocked the entire path, trapped between the steep slope and the cliff. The wind howled around the rock. It was as if he was saying, Ali came all the way to the base of the rock. He looked up. The rock was so high that its top was almost invisible. He looked at his frail body and then at this enormous mass. Logic was telling him to go back to sleep, not to be crazy. Mathematics was saying, quote 39, the laws of physics were shouting, quote 40. But Ali was moving with that feeling, that love, that began where logic ended. He gripped the pickaxe tightly, spitting into his palms. He fixed his feet to the muddy ground. He took a deep breath. He filled his lungs with the cold night air, and Ali's booming voice shattered the silence of the night. Bismillah. The pickaxe rose into the air and landed with a great clatter on the hard ground at the base of the rock. Sparks flew. That first blow was not only to the stone, but also to the laziness, hopelessness, and selfishness that had settled over the village. The valley echoed. While everyone was asleep, while everyone had given up, a madman, a wandering strange shepherd music was at war with the mountains. The night was long, the stone hard. Ali was alone, but Ali knew that those who set out on the road would not be left stranded. When the first rays of morning light fell on Harmanchik village, the marks of the pickaxe that Ali had struck with superhuman effort during the night had disappeared in the shadow of the enormous rock. The small holes he had made at the base of the rock looked like nothing compared to the majesty of this giant mass. The stone still continued to block the road with the same proud and merciless attitude. But that morning the fire that fell on the village square was much more scorching than the heat of the sun. Rustam, the village blacksmith's 5-year-old daughter Zainab, with her curly hair and cheerful face, had suddenly developed a fever during the night. Her mother had put vinegar-soaked cloths on her forehead until morning. Her father had prayed over her, but the child's fever, far from subsiding, had only intensified. Zainab's cheerful chirping had stopped, replaced by groans and delirium. Hatish Anna considered the village's midwife and healer. She was summoned home in a hurry. Mother Hades checked the child's pulse. She lifted her eyelids, her face turned ashen. Shaking her head from side to side, she looked at Rustam. He turned around. Quote, 41, he said, his voice trembling. Quote, 42. He couldn't finish the sentence, but that silence echoed in the room like a death announcement. Rustam rushed out of the house like a madman. He ran to the village square with his daughter lying unconscious in his arms. He shouted, "The road! Open the road! My daughter is dying!" At that moment, all the village's problems vanished. The merchant Qasim's promissory notes, the mayor's bureaucracy, the young people's travel plans, they all vanished into thin air. The crowd in the square froze when they saw the small body in Rustam's arms. Everyone ran to the pass where the rock was, but the scene was the same. That cursed rock wouldn't let them pass. A few of the young men said they would climb over the rock. They tried. But the rock was as slippery as soap from the rain, and the top overlooked a steep cliff. Crossing there with an unconscious child in their arms meant death for both of them. They said they would go around the edge. They tried. But the rock to the right was a steep slope, and to the left was a ravine meters deep. Not even a goat could pass, let alone carry a person. Rustem, clutching his daughter, had collapsed at the foot of the rock. That giant blacksmith, that powerful man who hammered iron, was now weeping helplessly in front of a stone. "Oh God," he cried out to the sky, "will you take my daughter from me because of a stone? Is there no way, no solution?" Even the merchant Cassim bowed his head, unable to utter a single word. He had money, horses, and power, but at that moment he was nothing. The villagers began whispering, "Ah, if only we had tried yesterday, if only we hadn't waited. I wish we had lent a hand." Regret spread like waves, but regret didn't open the way. Ali stood sheltering in the shade of a tree a little behind the crowd. His hands were torn to shreds from working all night. His palms were blistered, the cracks bleeding and drying. He hid his hands in the pockets of his jacket so they wouldn't be seen. His body was crumbling with exhaustion. His bones ached. The area under his eyes was dark purple. Ali heard Rustam's cry. He saw Zainab's pale face, scorched by the fever. He saw his mother's fingernails, injured from scratching the rock. At that moment, the storm raging in Ali's heart was greater than the storm of that night. He whispered to himself, "Hold on, Zainab. Hold on, my dear. This uncle will dig that stone with his fingernails if necessary, but he will open the way." His weariness vanished instantly. His sleeplessness, his hunger, his pains all lost their meaning. Now the issue wasn't opening a path, but saving a breath. At that moment, Ali was not just a servant. He transformed into a warrior. He retreated. No one noticed him. While everyone cursed the rock, he ran not towards his hut, but towards the old quarry outside the village. He needed a bigger crowbar, a stronger rope. As the sun set, a deathly silence fell over the village. Zainab's breathing became labored. Her wheezing intensified. The villagers had given up hope, waiting and praying. But when night fell and everyone closed their doors, immersed in their grief, a shadow appeared from the darkness at the foot of the rock. This time the shadow was not alone. It carried anger, stubbornness, and a faith strong enough to move mountains. Ali wrapped his bleeding hands around the handle of the pickaxe again. "O Shafi, O God who heals," he said this time, "may this path lead to healing. Give me strength." And the pickaxe struck the rock 1,000 times harder than before. Tonight, either that rock would shatter or Ali would die at its foot. There was no other way. The darkness that descended upon Harmanchuk village that night. The music was darker, more suffocating than usual. Even the weak streetlights illuminating the village square flickered, as if ashamed of the despair. The lights that never went out in the houses, especially in the window of the blacksmith Rustem, were like a silent witness to the village's shared sorrow. Inside, little Zainab was struggling for her life, while outside, Ali was struggling with fate to save that life. Ali was at the foot of the rock. It was long past midnight. The wind was blowing like a knife, making his body shiver as it touched his sweat-soaked back. But Ali wasn't cold. The fire burning inside him was strong enough to overcome the biting cold outside. The pickaxe in his hand had ceased to be a tool. It had become an extension of his arm. With each stroke, the sharp sound from his bones echoed in the depths of the valley. His hands, oh, his hands, the handle of the pickaxe, which he had swung incessantly all night, had wounded his palm. His bare hand caused unbearable pain as it touched the hard wood. "Don't stop, Ali," he was saying breathlessly. "As long as Zainab breathes, you can't stop." His plan was simple, but it was madness for human strength. It was impossible to break the rock. The stone was too hard. It was like granite. So he had changed his strategy. Instead of breaking the rock, he decided to hollow it out. He would dig the soil under the side of the rock facing the cliff, upset its balance, and with the help of gravity, roll it down into the valley. But for this he had to dig tons of soil and small rocks in that narrow space all by himself. As the hours passed, Ali's body began to give up. His arms could no longer lift, his legs trembled, his vision blurred, and his stomach churned. The army. Hunger and thirst attacked from one side, exhaustion from the other. The devil began whispering temptations into his mind. Crazy Ali. Vagabond Ali. Look, there's no one with you. Where's that know-it-all, Niazi? Where's Rich Qasim? They're sleeping in their warm beds. For whom are you tearing yourself apart? If you die and they find your body in the morning, they'll just say, quote, 53 and move on. Leave, go to bed. Ali stopped. He leaned the pickaxe against the ground and caught his breath. He raised his head. He looked at the light of Rustam's house. In that light, he felt a mother's prayer, a father's despair. "No," he shouted into the darkness. His voice was hoarse. "Let them sleep. Let them not know. God knows, and that's enough. I will lift this stone not for myself, but for that companion." He grabbed the pickaxe again. This time he struck the earth with compassion, not anger, as if he wanted to split open the heart of the earth and bring out the mercy within. As he dug, the ground beneath the rock began to hollow out. The danger was growing. The rock could fall on him at any moment, crushing him in the hole he had dug. Ali knew he was digging his own grave, but he wasn't afraid. Quote, 56, he was saying silently. Just before dawn, Ali had exhausted his last ounce of strength. He had dug quite a hole under the rock, but that massive mass still stubbornly remained in place. He needed one last big move, one last lever to upset its balance. He dragged a thick, long branch that had broken off from a nearby oak tree in the storm. He placed the branch in the hole he had dug under the rock. He would use it like a lever. He wedged the branch under the rock. He leaned his shoulder against the branch. He nailed his feet to the ground. He gathered all the muscles in his body, his last ounce of strength, the last shred of hope in his soul. He gritted his teeth. Oh God. He pushed, and the rock creaked. That terrifying, supposedly immovable piece of mountain moved millimeter by millimeter. The earth crumbled. The weight of the stone fell on Ollie's shoulder. His bones cracked. It felt as if the world was on his shoulders. Come on, Allie groaned. Tears streamed from his eyes from the pain. Come on. Blessed One, don't be stubborn. Give way. At that moment, he felt not only a physical force, but also a spiritual hand touching his shoulder. He wasn't alone. On that cold night in that muddy pit, he felt as if he could hear the angels' amens. The rock swayed like a cradle. It had reached its equilibrium point. It would either fall on Ollie or tumble into the abyss. He was in purgatory. Allie closed his eyes, and with a cry as if giving his last breath, he strained, and the silence of the night was shattered by a muffled, deep rumble from beneath the earth, the cry of Ya Allah that came from